All right. So thank you again to Sam for that introduction. And I know that some of you listening today were part of the Romancing the Gothic book club, which just listened to Orson Welles' War of the Worlds as part of that series. And I think War of the Worlds is actually a really great place to begin a discussion of Radio Gothic because it is relatively unique, but also a huge inspiration for the Gothic radio drama of the 1940s to 1970s that I'd like to talk about today. So for those that don't know, The War of the Worlds was a 1938 production of H.G. Wells's 1898 novel, which was about a Martian invasion. And it was heavily adapted for radio by Orson Welles and a team of writers and creatives who worked on the radio show Mercury Theater on the Air. And Mercury Theater on the Air exists sort of at the golden age of radio. This is a time period in which 43 out of 45 million households in America have a radio in the house. And Mercury Theater on the Air is part of the move towards increasing radio drama adaptations for the general public. So in terms of English language speaking scripts that had been previously aired on radio, outside of America, most of these scripts, in all of these scripts, were operas or plays that were already being produced on stage with a live audience who were able to see it. And these were just recorded and put on air live. But Mercury Theater on the Air, along with a few other early iterations of the radio drama format, tried to actually adapt scripts specifically for the idea of a radio listening audience, an audience that has only the auditory aspect and doesn't have other people to cue off of and is instead alone in their homes listening to these stories. So it's a deeply American institution, really, the radio drama overall, and the move towards a Gothic radio drama comes out of Mercury Theater on Air, which first shows Dracula as their very first offering on air, which is considered by some the actual best adaptation of Dracula available to consume at all. I think what's really interesting here when we think about Dracula and the move towards creating a radio Gothic is the creation of a soundscape and the emphasis on sound effects. So we see here physically that there's a orchestra, there are arrangements being made, there are people talking into mics, there's drum sets, but then there are also these sound effects that a team of sound engineers are performing live at the same time. And this is really where Orson Welles creates a lot of innovations that then last through Radio Gothic drama history. The famous story that I'd like to use today to elucidate this is one from that first production of Dracula, in which Orson Welles was looking for a way from his sound engineers to create the sound of a heart being stabbed through by a stake for one of his vampires without having to verbalize that to the audience, without having to have a verbal cue that says, and now a stake is being stabbed into the heart of this vampire, where the audience would just understand what was going on. And so they first present him with a cabbage and a sharpened broomstick, and he says, no, the sound of this, it's too leafy. This isn't correct. And he then asks them to drill a hole in the cabbage and fill it with water to try and create some of the blood sound effect. And when he does that, it's still not right. So he's frustrated and he goes out and he gets a watermelon and he brings it back in and he sort of suddenly grabs a hammer and smashes the watermelon. And the whole audience that's around him shudders at the sound. And he says, oh, well, that's it. That's the sound then. If everybody can visually see what I'm doing and they still feel disgusted by it, then I know that it will work when it's on air. And what I think that this also emphasizes is the more graphic nature of radio drama. And when we think about Radio Gothic, sort of the more graphic nature of what that horror now looks like, because film and television at the time is still engaging in censorship. There are not graphic scenes of gore being depicted to the same degree. But because these types of images are being created in the mind's eye here, even though Orson Welles and future radio drama producers have the intention of creating extremely graphic scenes in the mind's eye and are doing a lot of work to make sure that happens, because it is not a visual form and not a visual medium, they are able to get away with a lot more graphic detail. A scene that happens in What Creeps by Night, I believe, is of a woman who's being beaten to death after her husband comes home and finds out that she's been cheating on him. He comes home, he beats her to death, and that scene lasts for tens of seconds. It's a long, long time that you're listening to someone be beaten. And I think it's a really interesting moment where a radio show in the 1940s is doing something that you could not depict on screen in the same way. But because it is this non-visual format, what they're able to get away with is very different. And so it has a different kind of feel to it than what's happening on film at the same time. And of course, what makes War of the Worlds such a sensational piece of media is the innovative production details that Orson Welles does here. So he has the first half of the broadcast sound like a genuine news broadcast. He fakes the sound of a genuine news broadcast as if real news broadcasters are reporting live on an actual Martian invasion taking over New Jersey. And the claim here is that if 6 million people heard this live, 1.7 of them believed it, and 1.2 of them were genuinely scared enough to run into the streets or call the police or call their local news agencies. And so it created quite a stir. 12,500 news articles were written in the week after its airing, and Orson Welles had to make an apology because he didn't want people to think that he had intentionally attempted to scare them to this degree and create such a panic. Of course, he did, in fact, intentionally scare them to this degree. We have the notes from the drafts of the script in which it's clear that he's asking the scriptwriters to change what they're writing so that it's more believable and much more likely to actually convince an audience that has tuned in a little bit into the broadcast that there is, in fact, an alien invasion in New Jersey. So that aspect of the War of the Worlds is the break from what the radio drama format looks like in terms of it's trying to imitate a different form. And that's not necessarily what's happening in the radio drama that we're going to listen to today. But what happens after that first 40 minutes is what really defines what radio drama is. So after that point, it then switches into a more typical radio drama sound, which is of a first-person narrator describing what's going on and a few scenes being acted out by that character who we've come to know as our sort of protagonist, who's now in a physically embodied world that we're able to hear as they interact with other people. So that sound is really what we'll take forward with us into the Radio Gothic overall. And a few other things that symbolize the Radio Gothic and are motifs that run throughout it are these extremely realistic sound effects and a consideration of pacing. In War of the Worlds, there are elongated periods of time in which music is playing because the goal is to make the audience uncomfortable, to make them spend too long sitting, waiting for the next part of the radio broadcast, and to sort of give that realistic feeling of we'll be right back on a news broadcast if it was on television, in which the people behind the news broadcast don't exactly know what to say next, right? So it feels very realistic. It feels very live, which is being recorded live, but it's scripted in that way. And so that pacing element, the pacing in of silence is really important for Radio Gothic, as well as that first person singular usage. So what I want to do today is actually highlight a few motifs that show up and themes that show up throughout the Radio Gothic, the who and the what and the where of the Radio Gothic. And in honing in on those specific themes and motifs, I hope to sort of demonstrate the generic quality of Gothic radio drama and point to the aspects from fiction and film that are being brought forward into a new era and adapted to the radio format and how they sort of shift and change. But in order to do that, I'd like to take examples from 3 of my own favorite radio programs. These are not necessarily the most popular, though Lights Out and Suspense were deeply popular. The 0 Hour was not necessarily so popular, but these are 3 I really like. I think that they have really solid recordings online you can listen to on archive.org, the Internet Archive, for free. You don't even need an account because these are past copyright. And so you have the ability to listen to these. They sound nice. You can listen to them in your car while cooking, and it's a good upload quality. So I think that these are 3 good things to listen to if you're looking for an entry point. So just for some background info into these 3 radio programs, Lights Out ran from 1934 through 1947, and the emphasis of Lights Out is a little bit different from the emphasis of most Radio Gothic in that it is focused on supernatural horror plots. It's focused on sort of a Lovecraftian tradition. And if you listen to that horror theater recording that I did for Goth's Breakfast, it's in the Grand Guignol tradition, this idea of a horror theater that is meant to outrage and disgust its audience as opposed to purely entertain them or even to emphasize story over disgust. Here, the emphasis is definitely on disgust. And so sound effects are a really important part of Lights Out. We'll talk about one a little bit later. But these sound effects are the thing that the Lights Out structure is built around. Characters are often dead all along, removing the plot element of what's going to happen next to the character. Instead, it's about shocking us as the listener into realizing, oh, this was a person who committed suicide at the beginning of the story, and we're now actually just hearing their thoughts post-death or during the duration of their suicide attempt. These are also 15-minute chunks, which means that the central element of disgust that they're built around for the audience happens within the span of about 7 minutes, as there's an intro and an outro and sometimes an ad break. So you have 7 minutes of actual content to listen to. These are very quick, therefore. And they were played very late at night when other radio stations were just playing music. And the reason that they're played very late at night is because despite their great popularity, they also had a lot of outrage after a production of a script called Burial Services, which was about a paralyzed girl who gets buried alive. And this episode was so poorly received that listeners sent more than 50,000 letters to NBC asking that they change the program, and NBC therefore banned the program from airing before 11 p.m. So it's airing at a time where there's no other radio drama or any form of entertainment other than music happening on the radio, which means that it then has a lot of popularity built in because even despite its subject matter, it's now the only form of entertainment for people to listen to. So at the heyday, it had 600 fan clubs across America that were describing ideas for what could be written into Lights Out, that were writing into their fan mail, etc. Suspense is one of the most famous radio Gothics of all time. It's extremely long running from 1940 through 1962. It has 900 episodes, and its emphasis here is on thrillers and a relatable protagonist. Alfred Hitchcock directs the first episode, and I think a Hitchcockian sense of what radio Gothic looks like is really happening here, insofar as the characters feel like real regular people who have been dropped into an unfortunate or nefarious circumstance, and they have to figure out a way to get out of it. And so this is extremely influential. It's often written by crime writer dramatists, people who had written for film and television, other forms of crime drama, detective drama, and thriller drama. And so the suspense element itself is a really important framing device that's used in the early iterations of this. The narrator will describe that something is being held from you, the audience, in suspense, and you have to listen to the end of the story to figure out what it is for all of the puzzle pieces to snap into place. And when it's then finally put into place, when that last piece drops in, the narrator will come back and say, and we've been holding this in suspense, and now you have it. And so it gives this sense of a very strong framing device that's really important to suspense that goes away with time. So at first we have this strong framing device and we have this very influential drama style. And then as we approach the 1960s, it starts to become repetitive and take a lot more from scripts written by people from other shows. And they would just put those on the air as part of suspense instead. And this meant that it became more supernatural and it lost that structure that it had at the beginning. And then the 0 hour, which is really after the golden age of radio and sort of marks the end of the ability for radio drama to work. At this point, we no longer have live performances, so Lights Out and Suspense were both performed live into the radio, but at this point, 0 hour is syndicated. It's available to listen to at any time, whereas Suspense was only available to listen to at 6 p.m., a family show, something to listen to after dinner. Now, Zero Hour, not live, only lasts for 2 years. Same types of plots as Suspense, but here we have a story that is told across 5 different parts. So on Monday, we get 30 minutes of the story. Tuesday, another 30, Wednesday, Friday, Thursday, and then Friday, you would get the end of the story. And this format, I think, is really interesting to listen to now as a sort of mini series, but at the time was not well received. And so they transitioned into a format in which one actor would star across all 5 performances of a week, and then the actor would switch out, even now making it so that each of those stories is a discrete story. And therefore, the Zero Hour has some really interesting plot elements. I think in terms of scripting, it's one of the most detailed and well thought through because of its elongated time, but it has less airtime. It is post the time period in which radio drama is thriving, and therefore there's not so much in terms of the content to actually listen to. All right. So in terms of the who of radio Gothic drama, I think something that we just heard about with Zero Hour is this idea of a starring actor playing a character across multiple different iterations of the same story. This is a way of drawing people in. So audiences at this point were being advertised to for these Gothic radio dramas with specific actors and actresses playing particular roles. The idea being, I'm going to be able to listen to Lucille Ball now, not in I Love Lucy, but instead in a different context. And what's really interesting here is that there's a tension point between this type of who of Radio Gothic, in which these actors are embodying roles that sort of go against type. This was a very common way that actors would attempt to parlay their skills into a different kind of role after they had been typecast in Hollywood, was by going back to Radio Gothic and saying, let me play a role that I don't usually play. Let me have a voice or intonation that I don't usually get to have in my job right now. In a romantic comedy role or in a tragedy role, now I get to be in this thriller suspense format. And so you're hearing these people engage in very different storytelling than you might be used to. And so in that way, you're being brought into the narrative while being advertised to that these are people that you know from a different format. And at the same time, the other who of radio Gothic drama is the role of the host, right? We have Rod Serling standing in the middle picture there, and Boris Karloff was another person who hosted these shows. And so part of this is this idea of, oh, this famous actor from Twilight Zone or from Dracula is now the person who's introducing and sort of telling me that this next 30 minutes of my time is going to be worthwhile. It's going to be spent on some good horror media, some good Gothic media. And so you have this tension between the frame actor narrative of, well, I trust Rod Serling, I trust his judgment about what's a good terror concept. And so I'm sure that this will be a good show, the Zero Hour, as he's hosting it. And then this idea of, well, this actor that I know from screwball comedies is now playing a very different role, and I'm really invested in hearing them play that role and be very in it in a way that you wouldn't necessarily see elsewhere. So it's a really interesting tension point between that frame narrative and the starring role of that character. So I'd like to play a few of these intro sequences because they're also very iconic, and the intro sequence itself is really important for establishing sort of the tone of each of these shows. So I'm going to play one from Lights Out, one from Suspense, and one from Zero Hour. And you'll have to bear with me as I have a time with technology. This is from Lights Out.
Tonight is the 4th anniversary of Lights Out. After 4 years of fantasy and imagination, chills and thrills, Lights Out celebrates by bringing to the microphone the internationally known actor whose name has become synonymous with the unusual and fantastic. The National Broadcasting Company takes pleasure in presenting Boris Karloff in the first of a special series of Lights Out broadcasts.
Lights out, everybody.
Tonight, Lights Out presents another psychological drama, a play in which the principal part is taken not by the character himself, but his thoughts. The voice you are about to hear is that of the thoughts of one Darrell Hall, accused murderer, sitting in a courtroom awaiting the return of a jury, which is to decide whether he is to live or die.
So I think that's a really interesting example for that push and pull of that element of introducing Boris Karloff, saying Boris Karloff is going to be the main character of this Radio Gothic. You're going to hear him, and how exciting. And then you get the wind, you get the sound effects, the bell. You think that you're going to start the actual drama, and then we go back to a narrator. We go back outside of the plot. And so I think that there's that really interesting push-pull there that's going on with these radio dramas in which they want you to be sort of in a state of interruption, especially at the beginning of the broadcast itself. And Suspense does this a lot because of the frame narrative that they use. By saying we're trying to keep you in suspense, it means that at any time that narrator can come back and say this to you and take you out of the moment in that way. Okay, and now I'm going to play the introduction of Suspense.
This is Hollywood and CBS presenting Forecast Number 4. Herbert Marshall, directed by Alfred Hitchcock in the first program of a proposed new series entitled Suspense.
I'm going to skip to the devil in the summer house because it's what we listen
to later. Suspense. Now let's see. Suspect, suspectant, suspend. Here we are. Suspense. The condition of mental uncertainty, usually accompanied by apprehension or anxiety. Fear of something which is about to occur, as do not keep me any longer in suspense.
For our story of suspense tonight, we invite you to enjoy The Devil in the Summer House by John Dixon Carr.
Yes, I think that dictionary approach is very typical of Suspense, and it really gives a sense for the framing narrative, again, being so strong and being such a compelling part of these Radio Gothics. And then finally, I'll end on the 0 Hour. And this is the one with Rod Serling.
The Mutual Broadcasting System presents The 0 Hour. Sponsored in part by Quaker State Motor Oil and National Presto Industries. This is The 0 Hour on Mutual Radio. I'm Rod Serling. You're listening to The 0 Hour. Rest your eyes. Exercise your imagination. This week, Bill S. Ballinger's best-selling novel, The Pursuit of a Damned Couple. The wife of the red-haired man. Starring Patty Duke Aston, John Aston, and Howard Duff.
So there, I think we're getting away from some of the aspects that defined early Radio Gothic, but Rod Serling's character overall is very specific, right, within the Twilight Zone universe and with the sense of who this person is. And so, despite the fact that now at this point with syndication, that intro is relatively static from episode to episode, and Rod Serling does not participate as much in exiting that frame narrative and entering into the story itself as some of the other stories that we listen to. I think that it still has a really interesting aspect of the push and pull of you're hearing, okay, this is Rod Serling's voice. It's going to sound the same each time. And so I know that I'm here. I'm in it with the 0 hour. All right. In terms of the what of Gothic radio drama, I think here we see some of the same Gothic concerns prevail across these plots, but in slightly different ways. So where in the Gothic novel and in Gothic fiction, we get the concept of the silly woman who reads too many Gothic novels and reads too many romance novels, assumes that she's in a Gothic or romance text, and therefore runs into a dangerous situation, assumes that she's in a too dangerous situation, right? And causes problems for herself. I think here what we get is a variation of this with a new woman kind of variation in perspective, in which it's instead a headstrong woman, a woman whose morals or logic are getting her into trouble because she does not understand that she's part of a horror plot or a Gothic plot, and she instead is trying to live her life by a certain set of ideals or strong belief against the supernatural, belief that that couldn't possibly be happening to her. So one example of this is The Wife of the Red-Haired Man, which we just listened to a little bit of the intro of from 0 Hour, in which Hugh Ronan escapes prison after he was put in prison for some unknown crime during his service in the war, and he comes to find his first love and wife, Mercedes, who at this point, having assumed that her husband is dead, has married another man. And Hugh Ronan has no intention of giving up his wife and decides that he's going to kill this new man. And Mercedes is put in this really interesting position where she did not intend to cheat on her first husband. She assumed that he was dead, and now she's seen that he's willing to be a murderer. And so she has this moral quandary of, what do I do? I think I should still honor my marriage vows, but to do that is to be in a dangerous situation. And she chooses to partake in the dangerous situation. She chooses to value her first marriage. She goes with her first husband now on the lam as they're trying to run away from police, drive across New York and get away from police who are sort of our narrators hunting them throughout most of the story. She's selling her jewels. She's taking out money. She's helping him rob people because she has this strong moral code that she has done something wrong by not being faithful to her first husband, even though now she's in great danger. And as we're listening to the story, it becomes more and more clear how much danger she's in and how bad her first husband is for her to be around. And so that sort of move from the Gothic trope of the silly woman towards the horror trope of the final girl, or a character who doesn't necessarily understand what plot they're in, and that lack of plot and genre awareness, I think, is a really interesting motif that comes up throughout. There's another story, I think, in What Creeps by Night, in which a woman is told repeatedly by the superstitious people at her honeymoon location, don't go onto that balcony. That balcony, somebody else who looked just like you was on that balcony and they died, they fell. And so if you go on that balcony, the same thing will probably happen to you. And she says, well, of course I should go onto the balcony because that's superstitious. I don't believe in that. And so even though it's, scaring me a little, I need to prove that that's incorrect. And of course she is immediately taken into the ocean. She potentially is going to die. And because she's a strong swimmer, she lives. But it's an element of this tension between the new idea of a woman who thinks that she's part of a regular situation and a realist novel in a sense, and now is part of a Gothic drama where she otherwise is not expecting to be. And then we also have a common plot device of a cheating spouse. This, I think, is handled in a really interesting way, specifically in The Devil in the Summer House, which I'll play a little bit of later. the example that I want to use here is of a man who has gone back to this Gothic mansion, sort of a Southern Gothic mansion, 25 years on from when the person who owned that house has killed himself. And the reason he's come back with a police officer to investigate is because he's received a letter from that dead man saying, I in fact did not kill myself, I was killed. If you come back to my house, I'll be able to tell you who killed me. And so he now is experiencing a flashback to the day of the death, the day that the suicide potentially occurred. Now murder occurred, and he's trying to figure out what could have happened. And in this, we see that he was in love with the wife of the man who committed suicide. And in fact, that is the woman who did kill her husband because she's cheating on him and the husband is cheating on her. So this is an escape from her unhappy marriage. And I think what's really interesting here, and in general, in terms of the cheating plot that is so common, it feels like it's every other episode for Suspense and Zero Hour that cheating is one of the main plot devices, is that it's especially women who are engaging in the cheating, but it is handled with a lot of sympathy for the woman. The cheating is still the thing that causes the horror and the pain, often the death of either the main character, or the woman who has now been killed by her husband or killed by her lover, or it causes death of somebody else, her husband, her lover. And yet at the same time, her rationale for that cheating, her experience of being unhappy in her marriage, of feeling trapped, of feeling that she loves someone else, that's all handled with a lot of care and thought. And these are rather more fleshed out characters than I think I would have expected with how common the cheating plot is. And so I think that level of sympathy for the plight of the cheating woman is very interesting in this time period with less rights for women in terms of divorce. So I think that's a really interesting aspect that comes up. And then finally, in terms of this Lovecraftian horror, this idea of the deeply supernatural horror of the unknown, which we get in Lights Out especially, this plot device also comes up quite a bit and moves us closer into horror and away from Gothic. And I think what's really interesting here is that is emphasized through sound effects far more than plot itself. The plot is, of course, relevant, but in terms of the soundscape of a supernatural horror or supernatural Gothic radio drama is very distinct, and it can be picked up much more immediately than the soundscape of Zero Hour or Suspense, which are often focusing on less supernatural things, and therefore don't use sound effects in the same way. Instead, use very realistic sound effects. So what I'd like to play here is a sound effect from The Dark, which is one of the most famous episodes of Lights Out because of the sound effect created here. The plot of The Dark is that two medics are investigating a house call that has gone wrong, and a cackling woman is standing over a strange-looking corpse as a substance slowly rises from the floor in front of them. And I'm going to play this for you now.
Looking into the dark.
Yeah.
Doc? What's that coming up out of the hole in the floor? The dark. It's like black smoke. Listen to it. It's reaching up to her. Yes. What is it? Smoke? Black? What? Crawling up around her. It's covering her. No. Inside out. It turned her inside out. Sam, get up. Sam, open your eyes. The shadows are crawling along the floor toward us. Come on, Sam. Come on. Sam, you're too heavy. I can't lift you. Sam, you've got to hear me. The shadows are crawling toward me along the floor. I can't leave you. You saw what they did to her. Look at her. Inside out. A woman inside out. Oh, Sam. I'll drag you out of here.
Oh, you're so heavy. They're coming faster and faster. Like long black fingers. Yeah, my legs. Let go of me. Sam, I can't help you. They're holding me back. The black. It's covering you. Sam!
All right, so that's two instances of that famous sound effect. So in terms of the creation of that sound effect, you hear that first slurp of the woman being turned inside out, and then the second slurp sound effect. This is a very iconic sound effect. It's one of the most famous from Radio Gothic, but in terms of its creation, we're still not totally sure how exactly this was created. The script itself says that the next sound is to paint a picture of a woman being instantly turned inside out, somewhat like a rubber glove being turned inside out. It can be accompanied by a hiss, whereas the description from three of the technicians seems to be a bit varied. It doesn't necessarily come across in our recording, so it's unclear exactly what happened and whether or not this is fully true. But the claim is that three different technicians at once stood there, one of whom had to create the flesh sounds, and that technician put his arm in a length of inner tube, grasped the end firmly, and pulled. The second one had to create a blood and guts sound by attacking warm spaghetti with a bathroom plunger. And the third person was supposed to chew lifesavers into the mic to create a grinding sound as if the bones were being crunched by this effect. So in terms of plot, we have here a little bit of a diversion from the typical of the Gothic drama, but a very clear sense of what radio horror is starting to look like with that soundscape. And then finally, I want to talk about the where of Radio Gothic drama. And so there are two elements here, right? There's the extra diegetic and then also the diegetic sense of where are we in terms of the story, where are we in terms of the house and the movement. And so physically, we can see here that the actors themselves were really embodied. They were engaging in acting with each other. This isn't necessarily what we think of when we think of voice actors today who are a little bit more isolated. Instead, we had setups that were meant to allow those actors to really embody their performance and physically touch each other, pull each other, grab each other in order to create realistic sound effects as if they were physically fighting or romancing, etc. And so how this would often work is actually a set of mics that had a dead side and a functional live side. And so in that image that we see at the top with Boris Karloff, it's possible that one side of that mic is active and live and the other one isn't, in order to allow both actors to speak simultaneously into the mic without really any feedback. And so that one of them sounds a little bit further away from the mic. And so it creates this interesting sound effect where it genuinely feels like somebody is in a room embodied, right? If somebody is calling from a different room, often they would be in a different space within the physical environment of the recording, and they would have to have a large enough recording area so that that person could shout from a distance and be heard on the mics, so that it would give the sense of a person genuinely being in a different room. And what this causes is also a creation of a sort of Gothic manner in terms of our mental image of what it is to be in this story. So I'd like to play here 5 minutes from The Devil in the Summer House, which I played earlier, the intro of. And I just want you to really pay attention to all of the movement details, the things that cue us to think where we are in space and what is physically going on.
Brown in Houston. They made a major in the army.
Miss Canyon, he says his name's Miss Canyon, he says his name's Parker.
Oh, yes, Kitty. What is it?
There's a man to see you, Miss Canyon. He says his name's Parker.
Yes, I'm expecting him. Show him in, please.
All right, ma'am. So I take your knitting in your knitting bag?
Why should you take my knitting?
I don't know, Miss Canyon. I just wondered. You can come in now.
I must apologize for Kitty. Servants are getting to be a problem nowadays.
She looks pretty enough to get along.
Oh, Kitty's got large ideas. She wants to go on the stage, if you please, and do imitations, like Miss Draper. She only knew how hard it was acting all your life.
Isabel, you've been crying.
I have not. At least...
Is that why you sent for me?
I've missed you. You haven't been here in over a week, Joe.
I had an idea Jerry was getting a little tired of having me around this house.
Oh, no, Joe. Why, Jerry...
Yes, what about Jerry?
I wish I knew, Joe. That's why I wanted you here.
Where is he, by the way? I want to say goodbye to him before he leaves.
He's probably out in the summer house where he works with all those papers. He's got a lot of work to catch up with. He's going overseas tomorrow.
Yes, I know.
He's out there. He's been out there all day. His last day here, and I've been alone.
That sounded like a shot.
Yes, it was a shot, Joe,
In the house.
dear.
Doesn't seem to worry you.
It's only Paul, Jerry's brother, Paul.
Oh, thought you'd gotten him off your hands for good.
Jerry asked him out. He got here 2 nights ago.
That doesn't make it any easier for you, does it?
No, I don't mind. Jerry's fixed him up with a pistol range in the cellar. Paul's a terribly bad shot. Not like the rest of us. You don't seem to like it, Joe. Shall I have Kitty go down and tell him to stop?
No, it's bearable. As long as he keeps away.
Poor Joe.
But, about Jerry, who is it this time?
Joe, Jerry's been home 5 days on leave from camp. Well, never mind what camp. But he spent 4 evenings of those 5 with that Fisk woman.
Diane Fisk? The redhead with all the money?
Oh, she got money?
Well,
She must have some attraction then. Please understand me, Joe. It's not that I'm jealous any longer. It's just
no,
that
of course not.
Jerry goes his way and I go mine. I may not be without admirers myself, if it comes to that.
You've no idea how true that is, Isabel.
No, I was thinking about Jerry. He may not always be lucky. He may meet some girl who's not as broad-minded as I am. And then when he gives her the go-by... Paul must be getting really furious down in that cellar. He's not hitting anything.
He must be using a lot of ammunition.
Now, your trouble, Joe, is that you're too much of a gentleman. And if you really want to see Jerry, there he is now.
Where?
Just standing in the door of the summer house. Look out the window.
Infernally bright out there.
Doesn't he look noble in his new uniform? Sam Brown belt and revolver and everything. Look how he turns around and waves his cap at us. Like a real soldier.
Real soldiers don't exactly wave their caps, do they?
He does. Jerry? Jerry!
Hello there.
Jerry, Joe Parker's here.
Who?
Joe Parker. He wants to see you.
Well, give him a drink or something. I'll be up in a minute.
Into the summer house again. Not a care in the world, has
Now,
he?
listen, Isabel, you've got to slow down. You'll be crying again in a minute. Come on over here and sit down.
Light hurts my eyes, that's all.
Well, then we'll just pull these blinds. We'll still be able to see it. There, how's that?
It's better, thanks.
Now, can I get you anything?
Oh, no, you heard the Great White Chief's orders. I'm to get you something. What'll you have, Joe? A highball?
Don't bother with that.
Oh, it's no bother. Everything's out in the dining room here. The iceman didn't deliver today of all days, so I'm afraid I can't give you any ice. I read in the paper yesterday that we're likely to have automatic ice boxes any day now. Things that freeze ice by electricity or something. Do you believe that, Joe?
I doubt it. Listen, Isabel.
Here you are. It's not cold at all. It's the best I could do.
Thanks very much. What I wanted to say was, couldn't you get that brother of yours to give up practicing now? Hasn't he done his good deed for the day?
Yes, maybe he has. I'll ring for Kitty.
You don't have to call me, Miss Canyon. I'm here.
Oh, yes, Kitty. What is it?
All right, so I think that's a really interesting set of, sorry, I'm trying to get back to my PowerPoint. I think it's a really interesting set of movement details that we get from the soundscape here. We have the knock on the door, a door latch opening, a door shutting. We can sort of hear maybe that dead mic setup in which, in terms of both plot and characterization and in terms of physical space, we have a sense that Joe is leaning closer to Isabel, that he's leaning in. It feels like he has more closeness to the mic, whereas Isabel sounds a little bit more like she's leaning back. We know that she was knitting, and it somewhat seems like she's in a leisurely position in her chair because she sounds a little bit further away from the mic. We hear those gunshots, and those gunshots are, of course, important as this murder happens while Isabel leaves the room. While she's in the kitchen and she's fixing Joe a drink, that is when she murders Jerry, and the sound of the gunshots has a slightly different intonation when she's the one who's shooting the gun from her kitchenette area versus the gunshots that are happening down in the basement. And then Jerry, of course, sounds like he is outside at the time. He sounds very far away. And when Isabel is attempting to speak to him, we can hear her craning to sort of speak to him. It sounds like she's moving even further away from the mic in an attempt to make sure that Jerry can hear her. And then, as well as when she leaves the room, and she sounds, of course, again, far away from the mic. We hear the blinds being drawn, which is a really unnecessary small detail to create a sense of really being in a house. This did not need to be included for plot, a sense that the blinds have been drawn, and yet at the same time, the blinds being drawn is an auditory cue for us to think about the physical space of the room. And then we also have Kitty standing outside, the maid standing right outside of the door, and the sense of a very Gothic house in which the maids and servants are always listening, the walls are always listening, and sort of the detail of a Gothic mansion, even in a story in which those plot elements aren't necessary and won't be used. The maid's role is not used in this story, but it's a fun detail that she's right there, that she's listening at the door. So when she says, "I'll call Kitty," Kitty's already there. So I think that this is just a really interesting aspect of the creation of movement and space and sound in this entirely auditory medium, in which that visual aspect doesn't necessarily need to be there, but the blocking of the stage has been retained and now used in a way to really create a Gothic soundscape and something that feels very true to our experience of the Gothic. Now, very quickly at our end here, I'd like to have a word from our sponsors. This is a section for the description of some of the ads that were happening during this time. Not all of these shows, when they were digitized, not all of them had the ads brought with them, but sponsorship was, of course, very important for early radio. And so we have a sense of some interesting aspects from the sponsorship that I just want to talk about very quickly. I won't play you ads, I won't force you to sit through an ad, but it is actually really interesting to listen to Suspense and Zero Hour because both of those have ads and sponsorship built into them. And so there are two things that I just like to note here. The first is a merging of sponsorship with the tone of the media. So there's actually a very creepy set of Goodyear tire ads that happen in Suspense, in which it seems as though the point of these ads is to encourage people not to engage in distracted or drunk driving, but they are so deeply eerie and creepy. It's told from the perspective, one of them is told from the perspective of a woman who killed someone in her car and is saying, all I did was kill one person. And then it just comes so quickly, it's so shocking. And then the other one is told from the perspective of someone who has already died during their distracted driving experience, and now is speaking to us from beyond the grave about how we shouldn't do this. And they're both extremely creepy, creepier than the show itself. And so I think that's a really interesting element of sort of the merging of tone here, and sometimes the going too far of the sponsors into a Gothic or horror tone. And then the second thing is that in The Wife of the Red-Haired Man, this story from the Zero Hour that I talked about a little bit earlier, there are two ads that are played back to back, one of which is for kitchen products and cleaning products saying, here's a way to make sure that your wife is happy and buy her these products. And it has lots of clips of the woman talking about how much she loves these products for the home. And then immediately afterwards, there's an advertisement for good morals for girls. How do we instill them in our girls? Well, we joined the Campfire Girls, some organization for women from the 1970s. And so it's a sense of deeply female-focused advertising. And I think that really points to who the audience for these stories was. We don't necessarily have as much data on who was listening, but the sponsorship tells us that who was listening was potentially a majority, or at least strongly suspected to be a female audience listening to this in the home while doing housework potentially, or relaxing after a long day. These were the stories that were expected for the family to listen to, and not necessarily just for men to listen to, which I think goes a little bit against what our presumptions might be at the beginning of the 1930s and 40s when this radio drama begins. When we think back to War of the Worlds, who was listening to the radio, I think the move towards having very female-focused sponsorship and advertisement is really interesting. And I'd be happy to talk about it more in the Q&A. Thank you.